Hi everyone, welcome back to Talent Order's Breakfast Briefing, Friday, 5th of June 2020. This week I'm joined by Thomas Croall, who is Business Continuity and Resilience Manager at Skyscanner. Thomas, thank you so much for joining me this week. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today. Before I go into any questions, can you give the audience a little bit of background on yourself so they understand why I'm asking you these questions?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me say just thank you for inviting me on. It's always nice to be asked, and I think it's really important for us all as an industry to share insights at a time like this when we're going through an emergency. Why have you asked me on? I've known the founders of Talent Order for a number of years now, having worked for 13 years in business continuity and resilience, probably coming up to 14 years now, actually. And that's across a mix of sectors, both in government, local government, the City of Manchester, and also financial services. So some local UK banks and some large multinational banks as well. So I've had the privilege and learned some of the lessons the hard way in dealing with incidents in the past. And I think lots of new insights for all of us to learn out of COVID.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, great. So how are you responding to the pandemic now the restrictions are beginning to lift?
It's really interesting the linkage people are making between the restrictions lifting and the impact to organizations. And I think that massively varies based on what sector you're in. If you're in retail or hospitality, you're a restaurant, for example, absolutely, there's such a direct correlation there. For some organizations, though, the lifting of the restrictions or the movement restrictions and travel restrictions don't have that direct one-to-one correlation between being able to get the business back up and running again. So my current organisation, Skyscanner, clearly we're an online travel agent, and travel is severely affected, and we expect it to be for many years. So we're actively looking at those forecasts of how our travellers are being impacted and what their sentiment is, what their feelings are about the safety of travel, their ability. In terms of the restrictions lifting, I think different countries are in very different positions. So that lifting of lockdowns is going to be phased, and some countries are going to be slower than the others. And if you're a large organization, a multinational organization, you need to think, actually, do I need different approaches for the different offices I have around the world? Do we have one approach? What does that mean for our duty of care? If we're opening one office and we're doing so because we believe it's safe to do so, are we certain that those same conditions occur in the other offices that we haven't opened? Or how do they compare, and where is the consistency and equity? So that's a big issue that I think many organizations need to explore. And part of that is not taking all of the reporting and advice that we get from the media on face value, and similarly challenging or at least interrogating the different responses you see from different governments. So we know New Zealand, for example, has been very risk adverse in its lockdown straight away, whereas we're seeing very different tones and messages coming out from North America during COVID, or the USA specifically. So if, say, a New York office says, or the New York local authorities say it's okay to open up, is that really the case, or is that just based on local beliefs of the regulators and the authorities? So lots of health and safety and duty of care aspects for business continuity to explore, because let's just remind ourselves, this is essentially a health and safety incident on a global scale that's morphed into an operational disruption that's then morphed, or contagion has occurred, pun intended there, to it becoming an economic incident. So lots of different angles for us still to consider. And just because lockdowns are being relaxed, it doesn't mean that we're out the other end of this. And I suppose the one other thing I would say there is, on that note, that we're not out the other end, now is possibly the time. So reflecting on your question, we're 4 months in. 4 months is a long time. Most incidents that most resilience professionals deal with are dealt with in hours or days, not months. So we've almost entered into this new kind of, I won't call it the new normal, I'll call it the living with the pandemic phase, the interim normal.
Yeah.
So now's time to take stock. How do a view of how we've been responding within our own organizations, and do we need to change the trajectory because this isn't over yet?
Absolutely. I think there's so many things to consider, isn't there, depending on the company. I know for Talent Order, we haven't changed. We're all working very well from home, and we don't want to rush out there if we don't have to. But a lot of people are going straight back to work, and there's a lot of things to consider there, from many different industries as well, many different countries as well. So yeah, so much to consider.
I think that's an interesting point you say about rushing back to work. And I think people mentally have a connection between the office environment and work. And we need to remember we are working, we're just working differently. We're working at home. And being in a rush to get back to an office-based environment, well, absolutely, yes, I can see so many reasons why organizations would want to do so. But let's keep reminding ourselves that whilst the relaxation of lockdown measures is occurring as we speak, nearly all governments, or at least the governments that I'm monitoring for the countries that Skyscanner operates in, are still either requiring or strongly recommending work from home for all those organizations that can do that.
Yeah. Really, really difficult time. I think hospitality, that's going to be affected for a while, unfortunately. But retail especially, they've got so many measures in place now, haven't they? I mean, you've got the 2 meters apart, you've got less people going in, less staff. So all of these things need to be considered. And yeah, it's very difficult and a very busy time for professionals such as yourself, I'm sure.
Well, that's the other interesting thing about the challenges COVID has presented. It's not just a busy time for resilience professionals, it's actually a busy time for everybody, because everybody's had to become a resilience professional. And I stand to be corrected, but I don't know of another incident or another event in living memory that has required every facet of an organization and every facet of society to act differently and try to respond in the same way that we would to a business continuity incident. So maybe the world wars, if we count those within living memory, they changed organizations and society fundamentally. The financial crisis was significant, but it didn't have the operational impacts that COVID is having right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this kind of leads on to my next question. So what advice do you offer to large organizations? I know it would differ depending on sector, but yeah, what advice do you offer to these larger organizations?
I suppose hoping that most organizations now have fallen into some sort of a rhythm, if you will, of this interim normal, this living with pandemic phase. I would urge them to use that time wisely, to be very conscious of COVID fatigue. Now, I'm feeling it myself. Every day I'm trying to keep abreast of the media developments and everything that's going on. And there's a lot going on in the world right now. And there's quite a lot of energy required to do that. And people are a natural basic human psychology, people around me, I'm seeing in my colleagues and my friends, their interest is starting to wane. And now is the time, possibly, and I don't want to put forecasts or predictions out there because I'm not a healthcare or virologist professional, but now is possibly the time of peak risk. And what I'm referring to in that is the potential for second wave.
Yeah.
So we do know that there will be rises and drops, peaks and troughs in the virus for some time until there is a viable and deployed vaccine, or possibly the virus mutates into something that's less ferocious. But until one of those two things happens, there's the potential for second wave. And if that coincides with winter months, when seasonal flu is possibly also affecting and taking healthcare to capacity, then that may mean that governments, could be in one region, could be in multiple, may need to implement lockdown measures again, as harsh as, or possibly worse than what we've seen in the first wave that hopefully most countries are starting to come out the other end of. So on face value, you can say, well, if that happens again, then how does that differ to anything that we've just done? Well, tactically, the responses may be very similar, but you need to start questioning actually the additional stress of time. Another 6 months of working from home, what's that doing to employee morale? Another 6 months of furlough, can the government afford to even provide a furlough scheme? Are we doing the predictions and gaming that out now so we can get ahead of the second wave? Because if it does happen, there's likely to be very little notice. We know that COVID, the rate of infection is exponential, so the notice could be the matter of days. So without some very clear data points to work from, it's still prudent for us to think about it. If it doesn't happen, fantastic. The worst thing that could happen is that we'd put some forethought into it. If it does happen, hopefully by thinking about it now, you can be on the front foot.
Absolutely. A really good point, actually, mentioning that, if it hits around winter when there are lots of the flu, for example. Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. The hospitals are going to be busy anyway, aren't they, during those months? So absolutely, that is really something that we need to consider as something that really could be possible. Okay, so how have the last 4 months changed the way you operate? Apart from being from home, of course.
Yeah, 4 months. It's a long time. And I think there's some very obvious answers to how the organization has had to change. But I suppose if I try and make it a little more specific about business continuity and resilience, I've already mentioned that most incidents operate in hours and days, sometimes weeks, but not months. So that starts to require you to challenge some of the structures that your plans may have had in place. Particularly about cadence. How regularly do we need to be meeting and discussing COVID? And I think in any incident, there's no simple answer to that. It's the rhythm. I think the military uses the term battle rhythm. Needs to flex, and I think we're now at a point where we're keeping a watching brief on the situation and planning for the potential next wave. So what I've seen over the last 4 months is moving from daily meetings. The situation is changing so dynamically. Every day it's something new and where everybody's learning. Now to we've got a certain degree of insight, but we can't let ourselves get fatigued and drop the ball. So putting that rhythm in place, having that oversight, keeping those conversations going, still really important. I think the other thing is about the stakeholder relationships within the organization. Not being in the office environment makes it challenging to engage with people. But one thing that I found so useful is to keep talking with all colleagues, not those that I would conventionally talk to about business continuity, but actually all of the other facets of the organization that typically I wouldn't have regular dialogues with, because the interconnectedness of this is so tight woven. Something going on in regulation can have an effect on our financial planning forecasts for recovery, which might influence the way that we're redesigning the product for best product market fit on the other end. And it's really stretching the boundaries of business continuity and the challenges of it, and opening up some really interesting questions about actually what's the scope of business continuity and a resilience role. And I've reflected a lot of organisations, including the financial services regulators in the UK. They refer to operational resilience. And I'm not so sure it's helpful to have that word on the front there, operational, because COVID, as I said, was a health and safety incident, so that's operational, which became a market and financial crisis. And the two things are so tightly woven, we shouldn't be putting artificial boundaries between them.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, fine. So my last question, how do you think the pandemic will affect businesses' resilience practices for the future?
It's going to definitely put it at the forethought of a lot more board decision making and executive level decision making. Now, I have no doubt about that. The question is, how long does that attention, or how long can that attention last? So what can resilience professionals do now to harness that heightened level of awareness, to make sure it's sustainable, to make sure it's built into the corporate governance of the way that the organization operates and the way it makes decisions? So instead of resilience and risk management practices being an adjunct, being an afterthought, actually, how can we get them built in at inception of strategy decisions, operational, whether it be product strategy, whether it be workforce strategy, whether it be any aspect of the go-to-market? How can we get it built in? And one of the, I think, limitations of conventional business continuity planning is, and is still prevalent in a lot of organizations I come across, is that it's either all about the IT or it's all about losing the building.
Yeah.
Now, business continuity, and forgive me for anyone that's listening to this that knows these fundamentals, but one of the basic premises of business continuity is that it's all about impact-based planning. So you don't plan for any causality of event, any bad thing that could go wrong. You actually say, well, there's an innumerate amount of bad things that can go wrong. How could we possibly have a playbook for every one of those? But what you can do is have a plan for if you lose your building. Many different reasons you could lose your building, but you lost your building. You lose your people, your workforce, lose your IT and communications technology, and you possibly might lose or have a breakdown of your supply chain. Now, all of those things are the operational components of what makes an organization run, but it kind of forgets the most important aspect of the organization, or why most organizations exist. Most organizations exist, so I'll answer my own rhetorical there, is to serve the customer. So I don't think that anybody had effectively planned, or I don't know of any organizations that had effectively and formally planned for what if we've lost our ability to sell to the customer regardless of the rest of it.
Yeah.
So I think what's going to become more important and what I would hope to see out of the resilience profession is working more with colleagues in the organisation that are responsible for maintaining and nurturing the relationship with the customer. And even if you can't sell your physical product, or you can't sell the flight or the hotel because travel is restricted, how can you still maintain that relationship with the customer? Because that's the way that organizations are going, the way that customer expectations are changing. It's all about experience. It's all about relationship. And I think resilience professionals need to kind of see beyond the bricks and mortar, the tin and wires, and start to understand that brand and the relationship are the two of the most fundamental assets.
Absolutely. Yeah, completely agree. I mean, there's so much to think about, and I think a lot of people were blindsided. None of us, well, I say none of us, I don't think any of us have ever experienced anything like this before. So
I know I haven't.
Yeah, it's planning for the unexpected, and you've got to just cover all of those bases. And yeah, not being able to sell to your customers is a major one, because you just wouldn't even think, oh, I'm not going to be able to contact that customer. I'm not going to be able to see that person. I'm going to be in lockdown for 4 months. So yeah, I completely agree. Well, they are all of my questions today. Thank you so much for taking part and for giving me all of your insights. I found it really interesting. I'm sure our audience will as well. If anyone does have any further questions for Thomas, or any ideas for what themes you'd like to hear about next, please email me on amy.morris@talentorder.com or message me via LinkedIn. If you missed last week's breakfast briefing with John Bree, I will leave the link down below. I hope you're all staying safe and well. I'll see you next week. Bye.